All right, Janette, thank you so much for making time. We're going to be talking about auction properties. And, so many people that I know associate auction with bank owned or foreclosures. And that's really only part of the puzzle. So,
Correct.
can't wait to dig into this whole conversation and what this means for buyers and sellers. And this is something that you do. And we're talking about auction properties in Maryland and the DMV.
Yep, absolutely.
So got Janette Gray with us today. But yeah, so how long have you been kind of in this auction property type of world?
So I've been doing real estate for about 25, 26 years. I can say about 20 of those years, investors have been my niche. And so 20 years ago, investing meant a lot of things, right? You needed a lot of money. You were at the courthouse steps to bid on auctions. That's just not what we do now, right? Auction can be anything, right? You can auction jewelry, you can auction clothes. In this case, my investors, we are always looking for auction property. We don't care what shape it's in. So it can come through a bank, it can come through a seller, it could come through an estate sale. So really, it saves the seller a lot of money, time, and effort if they would even consider the option of auctioning their home versus the traditional listing of a property.
Okay. So in terms of like location, right? We're talking about auction. So like, from a scope of like where or how, what website, where will somebody even go to get this information? What's the hub
Okay.
or the location?
So I use what we call auction houses. There's two companies that I use. And what happens is you would engage the auction company on a property they have listed. So generally what happens when my sellers come to me, generally investors, and sometimes I have older sellers that just don't want to put the time and effort into doing repairs. They will call me. So upfront, it works like a traditional listing agreement, right? They would hire me as their listing agent. I will then engage an auction house. And what we would do is we would do the traditional, we would run the comps. We would say based on the area, whether it's Maryland, DC, or Virginia, we will come up with a number. And for this number, let's just use 500,000 because that's easy. If they had done all of their repairs, we could list it for 500,000. Then you have to pay 6% real estate fees because there's a buyer and a seller. And then you have a home inspection because the buyer doesn't want to buy a property as is. So then you have to go into this whole negotiations of repairs or putting money in escrow. When you do an auction, everything's online. So there's no more standing on the steps. Generally, what happens is my auction house, we will look at the comps, we will engage the seller. We will do something called the reserves. Your reserves is the amount you absolutely have to walk away with. So let's say on this $500,000 house, you have a $300,000 mortgage. If you add in all the bank costs or your closing costs, let's say you're going to need 310 to settle and walk away. That starts your reserves, right? Because we have to pay off your first trust. So what we do is we set something called the reserves, and that reserves means we're not going to take any offer less than that 310, that 325. So what happens is the auction company and we advertise these properties all 50 states, sometimes international. Everything's done online. Buyers will register with the auction company. For me to be a buyer at an auction, I need a minimum of 6%, what we call a deposit, depending upon the price. So in this case, 500,000, Joe, you do the math. I need 6% down just to make a bid, Because as a buyer, I'm paying all closing costs, all transfer tax. I am buying it as is. I get one time to view the property. So what will happen is, and this happens in about 30 to 45 days, is a very fast process. The seller sets the reserve. We advertise the property for about 2 weeks. We have formal pictures done. We send out all kind of blasts. The auction houses also have investors, thousands of investors that are looking for property all through the US. We market the property. We open up the auction on one day for 2 hours, period, full stop. We open up now, depending upon the condition of your property, if you need repairs, the auctioneer is going to tell us what they think the opening bid should be. There is a method of doing auctions called high-low. We start low to build up high. We already know our reserves in this example is about $325,000. So we might start the opening bid at $300,000. Now, doesn't that look attractive? In the DMV, a colonial, single family, 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths. Let's say it's in Mitchellville, Maryland. 300,000 seems like a deal, but what happens is 300,000 becomes 700 because what happens, the auctioneer is going to set what we call the minimum bid. In this case, our minimum bid is going to probably be $10,000. So you, Joe, you come in at 300. Woo! I come in at 310. Somebody else comes in at 320, and this goes on for the whole 2 hours, right? And then if I get to the end of the 2 hours, let's say you make a bid, let's say right now we're at, because what happens is somebody can say, okay, 310, then you come back and go 400,000. And I come back and go 450,000. And this can go on and on. If you make a bid 2 minutes before the auction closes, it extends it for 15 minutes. So on average, we set a 2-hour window, but on average, my auctions go anywhere from 3 to 4 hours.
Damn.
At the end of that 3 or 4 hours, we have an offer, and I'm going to make this up. Well, let me tell you about my last auction. It was in DC, multifamily, 4 units, 1 bedroom, 1 bath each. The market value, because it had nobody had done any repairs on the property for about 15 years. Market was 825. We walked away with 1.3 million on that property. The seller didn't do any repairs. It was not subject to an inspection. The only thing we were subject to is TOPA, because we have tenant rights, first right to refusal. We did the TOPA. And she only paid me a whopping 4% commission. So she saved even on a commission because the buyer pays all the other fees. She didn't pay transfer tax. She paid my commission, and she paid, of course, the title company, but those are minimum fees on the seller side. Mm-hmm. So she walked away with much more than she ever thought about. She didn't have any signs in the yard. There was no setting the appointments to see the property. We had the property open for 1 hour on a Thursday from 12 to 1. If you want to see it, you come. If you don't, you still bid. So auctions really take the pressure off the seller, because a lot of times they don't want people in their home. They might not even have cleaned their home. They might not have started packing. And here's the bid. In this case, the buyer had to come up with 6% of the offer. Mm-hmm. That is the deposit. And the reason why they take such a big deposit is because if you don't perform, that deposit gets split between the auctioneer and the seller, because you've wasted my time. But most of my auctions, I have never had that particular situation that happened, Joel, but I can tell you this is a new, faster way to sell your property. There is a stigma to it, a taboo to it, as if, oh my God, my house is in foreclosure. That is not what we do. We're not going to put a sign on your house, no sign in your yard. We're not going to inconvenience you with all of those musky repairs you didn't do. And really, you go to settlement, you get your check, and then you walk away. Now, here's the downside to auctions. If you are in an owner-occupied home, the day you settle, you have to move. There's no rent back. Mm-hmm. That's not how auctions work. Once you sell it, that investor or that buyer, they want that property. You have to move. So I tell all of my traditional sellers, when we start this process, hire your movers, clean out your house, because in 45 days, it's going to be over. So that's kind of how the process works.
Okay. So I'm going to start from the end of the process and work backwards.
Yep.
So that buyer, they put their 6% deposit in, mm-hmm. but then the auction house, they're getting these deposits to come in with multiple bidders. And if you don't get your bid accepted, then you get your money back.
Absolutely. Or they keep it in an escrow, because most mm-hmm. of these buyers are what we call multiple homeowners. They are looking to buy properties, right? And this is the easiest way to do it, especially if we have a buyer that is out of the country or don't live in the DMV. This is how they acquire these properties.
Okay. So then the average buyer, they have 30 to 45 days to close. And then are they buying cash typically or getting their own financing, hard money? Like what's the typical buyer?
So remember, I'm not representing the buyer, but when we've seen a combination, right? I don't know if anybody's doing hard money lending because that's not what's on the HUD, right?
Mhm.
The DC property was half cash, half financed,
Okay.
right? So they literally brought 200 and some odd thousand to the table and they financed the rest. I've had situations where investors finance the whole thing. I had a traditional buyer. She was a female. She actually bought a single family through auction in Prince George's County, converted it. She did an apartment at the bottom, lived in the bottom, rented out the top. So she created her multi-level property because she said when she got the mortgage, she couldn't afford it. So she took some money. Her dad helped her. She converted the basement to an apartment. It was a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath apartment. And she lived there. Matter of fact, she's still there. She just called me. She's thinking about buying another home. So she's got married. The children are coming. So she wants to expand. So she asked me, she said, could you rent my basement apartment? Absolutely, I'll help you do that. And she's looking to buy another home. So I've seen it multiple ways, right? That was a young lady who lived there as her primary, and she got I think she got, I think it was FHA. Don't quote me on that. I think it was FHA.
Okay.
But I've seen it all over the map. It just really depends on the type of buyer that's coming to the auction, but all kind of buyers now are coming to the auction. What I would say is you will need some money in the game, and you're buying a house that is not going to be subject to a home inspection. So you can get the home inspection, but there's no seller who's going to even entertain any kind of repairs for you.
Okay. So that conversion part, I want to come back to that in a second because that's
Okay.
really interesting and unique.
Okay.
So the example that you gave of the DC multifamily and then the bids going in above probably market price. And so, what's if you got buyers all kind of coming in on these on these auction properties, are there examples of stuff coming where people are actually getting a deal or are they coming in and getting market, average prices? Or is it kind of a range or what's the typical scenario if you're looking kind of at the up and down of the prices?
Well, let me say this. I have not experienced in a very long time. I'm talking about, 15 years ago when you needed 10, 20% down. I haven't seen like deals where you're getting a property for 500, but it's worth $1 million, right? However, I think the buyer that is coming to the auctions are investors who are looking to get their foot in this market, investors looking to expand in this market, or buyers that really want to live in the property, right? I don't know, Joel, and you know this better than me. There are deals out there, but those deals are few and far between because real estate is still the king to wealth building, right? So, and I've been in this business a long time. I don't know. I have not seen in the last, I would say 15 years where somebody has purchased a property for 100,000. They didn't do anything to it and it was worth 200,000. Like those deals may exist, but you're going to have to put some money into the property to actually get that $200,000 out of it. But I think auctions are a really good way, especially if you're in a tight market. There are multiple contracts being put on properties. If you have a specific neighborhood that you're trying to get into, I think auctions are the way to go. I can tell you my house that my husband and I purchased, we were actually looking at the auctions. We had put a deposit down and we ended up buying this. This actually ended up being a divorcee couple. And because I'm in the business, we got them way down. So I walked into my house with built-in equity. Those deals are few and far between, right? I knew another agent that called me that knew I wanted to be in this area because I had called. I was like, hey, I have a buyer. Let me know. They're ready. All these other things. And an agent called me on this one. And this was a couple that just hated each other and wanted a divorce, right? So we were all over that. But we had to put we have put a lot of money into this property. So my house now was worth, we totally gotten what we paid for it, but we've also put $200,000-300,000 because we had to do roofs, gutters. I mean, anything you can name we've done to this house. The last piece I have to do to my house is my front door entryway, which I got to get my mind around it because I'm tired of spending money on this house. But I think you can get those deals. They're just very few and far between. This couple hated each other to the point that they just wanted out. They didn't care. They just didn't want to walk away. They just wanted the mortgage paid off. But again, we walked in here and we were like, because we bought it as is, we were like, oh my God, it just started draining our pockets. So again, you can get those deals, but you got to put some money into it to get the value out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So from a standpoint, information, right? How would they get a hold of you? What other information is out there in terms of websites? Where would somebody, connect with you at?
Well, I mean, you could call me. I can give you my cell phone number. I work for my broker is South State Realty. That's probably the better way to get me. I'm going to give you the office number, and that way, they can screen the calls. But the office number is 301-333-1111. Again, I'm Janette Gray with an A, Gray. When you call, don't quote me on my extension, because when you call and ask me, they're going to go ahead and transfer you to my cell phone. But I think if you are in the market of selling or buying, it is a very good opportunity. But again, I want to also temper your expectation. When you are a buyer, you are bidding against other buyers that want that property, right? And
Yeah.
every buyer at an auction is there for a different reason, right? Some are primary homeowners. Most are investors, right? And some investors are looking for very specific kind of properties. I have an investor that will only buy single family homes. So every time I tell him there's an auction, we go through it. And if it's not a single family, he doesn't touch it. I have another investor that only purchases townhomes. I have another investor that only purchases condos. So I think an auction has enough for everybody, but you have to be patient. Properties don't come up all the time. And my sellers that are in the auction, they are ready to move the property and move on. So I think it just depends. So I would say, let's talk through it if you are looking to buy an auction. But if you're looking to sell, I mean, that is the easiest way to get rid of your property.
How many would you say on average, or how many transactions a month would you say?
Well, okay, now you're getting personal, Joe, but I do anywhere from
Well, no,
probably,
I'm sorry. For the entire auction house in the area. Sorry.
so the two I use, a month. I would say anywhere from 10 to 25 plus a month. It's not, they are busy. They are really, and remember, they are in the DMV, Maryland, DC, and Virginia. I just attended an auction last week. It was a duplex in Baltimore. So, I mean, they're all over, right? So, and they really guide me if I get a unique property, like I had a historic property, right? It took us probably about 120 days to close that because we had to go through some more hoops, like historical preservation. We had to engage the county. We had to get clearance from the courthouse. The courthouse had to approve the deal. So every now and then we'll get something that is unique, but you can auction off anything.
Interesting. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So like property, like jewelry, other things, like you can use these same auction platforms for various types of stuff to sell.
Any personal goods with values, diamonds, pearl, clothing, high-end clothing. I think for Christmas, they had an estate sale, very high-end stuff. I don't know if you've heard of St. John's cotton, but they had suits, women's suits on there going for like $2,500, and that was used. So, yeah.
Okay. So Janette Gray, they can contact you. They can reach out to you on the business line you mentioned.
Yep.
And it's JEANNETTE.
Gray with an A. And my email, of course, is jgray@JanetteGray.com.
Okay. So you mentioned these auctions can take anywhere from 1 hour to a couple hours. Is there a certain day that they're on? Is there a certain time that they're always on, or is it kind of sporadic?
Well, so you work that out with the seller, right? When I'm taking their listing agreements, what I would normally do is I explain the process, and then we do what we call a pre-auction call with the auction house, and we talk about when do you want to close? Because really they are driving the auction, right? And if you want to leave in 30 days, we will set a date at the end of the calendar. As long as I only use three auctioners, so to speak. I use Matt, I use Jim. Those are my two favorites. So I want to be on their schedule because I know if any hiccups come, if there's anything that's driving it up or down, they're going to call me right away and we're going to get in front of it, right? They're experienced. I think Jim is a third or fourth generation auctioneer. I mean, his great, great, great Alex Cooper's great grandfather started it. Alex Cooper's who I use, they are bar none. They are located in Maryland, but they know the DMV area. And Matt, who is my point of contact, like I said, it's a family business. I trust them. If I was in a jam with my own house, I would call them in a heartbeat. Customer services, bar none, they will come out. At the pre-auction meeting, we'll talk through the process again, answer all the questions. You will find out who your auctioneer will be. Just good information. And you have about 3 days to call them before anything goes live or anything. So Alex Cooper is who I use 99% of the time. I just logged on to their website and they are doing an art and luxury auction soon. So again, they have very high-end stuff, gorgeous properties, and they're trustworthy, right? They're not gonna, rip you off.
So if I'm on Google, what would I type in to get to the right website?
Go to www.alexcooper.com.
Cool. Okay.
Yep. And if you Google Alex Cooper auctioneers, it'll come right up.
I'm gonna dig for the last thing here. I want to dig back into the multifamily side of things. Okay, so someone purchases a single family property and then restructures the property to be able to have a second unit. So that means like a second address, a separate address?
Not a second address. So I'm going to run through the process. So you have a single family. You want to turn it into what they call a duplex, 2 units, right? So what you do is you get a engineer. I'm sorry, let me go back. You get an architect to kind of draw your plans because you got to take those plans to the county to get approved. The first thing you want to check before you purchase though is make sure the zoning allows for those multi-units, right? Because different residential zoning is different. In this particular case, the residential zoning was for 3, which means you can have up to a multi-unit of 3. This young lady, she went, drew up her plans, had the county approve it. She then had the inspector come out before she did anything because that inspector, once you get assigned an inspector, is an inspector from beginning to end, right?
Inspector with the county?
So, yep, the inspector with the county. So the inspector told her, you have to do this, make sure it's of code. Then she hired a contractor, and the way that she leveled it off is she took out the basement entry, closed that, fireproof the ceiling, which is from the first unit. The first unit was a 4-bedroom, 3.5 bath, 2-level. Everything is the exact same that it was in the primary house. Her money really got spent on the lower unit, right? She turned that into a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, open concept. It was bigger. It was bigger than a one-bedroom apartment. It was gorgeous. She did an open concept. She did a big entryway. She had her master. She had an ensuite off the master. She had a walk-in closet. And then her other bedroom was on her other bedroom and bathroom was on the other side of the basement. And she had a walkout. So you would walk out, and then she did a little walkway from the front where she had gone in the back. As far as the mailing address, it was the same mailing address. It was Unit A and Unit B. And the only thing the county did in this case was they put another mailbox in front. So it was a 3-car garage. So one garage went to the bottom unit and the other 2 went to the top unit. So it was a gorgeous property. So she now has a multi-level unit, and the top unit covered her mortgage.
Wow. That's brilliant.
Yep.
So like the garage, she blocked it off to where like it was separate.
Right. So the garages were initially, when she purchased it, it was like it was one door for two, and then you had the independent. The third one was by itself, so it was connected, but it had its own door. That one went to the apartment, the basement apartment. The other two with the single door went to the main property, and you could get to the main property or the upstairs unit from the garage. But the independent garage, it was so you could pull in your car, and there was a door that she added. And when you came out the door, you walked around the back of the house, and that's when you entered into the basement apartment. Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous.
What municipality was that in?
It was Prince George's County.
Okay.
It was in Mitchellville, Maryland, off of 301.
Okay. So
Gorgeous.
you have to be
But
aware of what's allowable and what's not, because some neighborhoods are only going to allow for one unit. Is what you're
right.
saying.
So zoning is very important. This was an older neighborhood that some newer townhouses was like kind of behind the old neighborhood. And the zoning for it was 3, if I remember correctly. It was 3 because there were like, you could tell it was an older neighborhood, but you could see some duplexes in there, but it still looked like a single family, but you realize, oh, it's a duplex. So before you go down that road, zoning is essential. Do not purchase a property to convert if the zoning doesn't allow it. And then once you decide to do it, call the county, make an appointment, get an inspector, because once you get an inspector, that inspector is yours until to the end. And throughout the process, she had other inspectors, like she had the electrical inspector and she had the plumbing inspector, but the overall inspector was the one that follows you from the beginning to the end. So it was absolutely brilliant.
That's pretty cool. If you're on the PG County website, and let's say you have a listing that you're looking at, can you cross-check that with the county website to figure out what the zoning is? Or
absolutely. And if it's on the MLS, if it's a public listing, it should list the zoning. If it doesn't list the zoning, pull the tax record. The tax record will also tell you what zoning it is.
Okay, so if it's multifamily or one unit, how would that read?
So if it'll say residential 1, 2, 3, or 4.
Gotcha.
So residential one house. That's all you can do.
Okay.
Residential 2 is generally 2, 3, and 4. When you get in the 4s, you're talking multifamily. And then when you have zoning that is residential R/C, which is residential and commercial, that's when you see your apartment complexes. Those are your, 50, 100 unit apartment buildings.
Cool. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you directly to ask questions, what's the best way to catch that?
My email is the best. You can email me at jgray@janettegray.com, or you can call my office. If you call my office, they will definitely track me down. The only thing about the office closes around 7. So if you email me, you can always get me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for making time. Some gold here.
No worries.
Wait to dig into some more of this stuff down the road.
Let me know, Joe. It was a pleasure. Thank you for giving me this space to talk about it. If you want me to come back, please let me know. If we don't talk, have a great holiday. Merry Christmas.
All right, you too.
Thanks. Have a good